on the top of Daf Nun Hayamid Beis, Shenemar Kol Gay Yinose. Now the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu Novi, which is also addressing the same issue, that somebody who climbs too high and becomes so full of himself, then Gay Yinose, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be mashpilo into a gay, into a deep ravine. And all this is the way that Rav Yosef conveys to Rava by interpreting this pasuk, and Rava himself is going to interpret this pasuk, that when a person is chozer midarko ra, and he's mashpil himself like a gay, then ultimately yinoso Hashem. So this is the process of pius of Rava when he serves his Rebbe Rav Yosef the wine on Erev Yom Kippur. From Tanya we learned to the Brisa, no divin adogon osur af b'ful mitzri yovich. As we saw, everybody agrees that according to Rabbi Meir at least, in the Lashon Bnei Adam, the meaning of the word dagon is digun, anything that you make a goren out of. And pula mitzri, once it's yovich, derech Bnei Adam lasos mehem goren mutter b'lach. But if this pula mitzri is wet, then although it's included on the yerek, but it's not included on the dagon, because you no longer pile it up while it's wet. You don't make a goren out of it, but rather you pluck it and harvest it, and it's eaten like other yerakos. Then the Brisa says mutar ba'orez. Orez is something that doesn't lend itself to pile up in a goren. And so too is mutar b'chilka, b'targis, u'b'tisnei. These are different types of chita, where they split the chita in half, or into thirds, or into quarters. And that's not called dagon. That's called, dagon only refers to chita shlema, complete chita, not something that's split. Now the Rosh adds something important here. Shegam kishechilkom li achar shenodar mutar mihem. The Rosh says that if the chita was shleim at the time of his neder, which means the neder was chal on this chita, and then subsequently it got split, he now is allowed to enjoy the benefit of this chilka, of this split non-whole chita. So it means that the neder is only chal on this chita as long as it remains whole. However, the Rosh offers another approach, an alternative view, that maybe it means that he split the chita before he took the neder. But if at the time of the neder it was dagon, meaning it was a whole, complete chita, then it remains usher even after he splits it. And this has to do with what we discussed many times, that a neder is an isa chefza, and once the chefza becomes usher, it remains usher. Hanodav and aperos hashana, usher b'chol peros hashana. If he takes a neder from all the fruits that will grow in this year, he is enjoined from having benefit from any peros that grow up until Tishrei. However, what's the chiddush of this brisa? Mutar b'gdoyim u'b'tloyim u'b'chalav u'b'beisim u'b'gozolos. These are objects which are not called peros. It's tzomeach, it does grow, but it doesn't grow from the ground like fruits. So you have milk and eggs and birds and the gedi or tle. All these are not called peros. However, and here's the big chiddush of the brisa, and this is a big chumrah. If when he took the neder, he declared gidulei shana olai, anything that grows during the course of the year, I won't benefit from. Asur b'kulon, because these are all things that grow. So when it says beitzim here, we're not talking about an egg as we know it today, but rather an egg that has an afroach, it has a chickie inside of it that will grow. I'm not sure about chalav. Why is chalav included under gidulim? This baffles my mind. Do you have anything on chalav here, maybe? All right, sorry, I don't know. If you have anything, let me know. Hanodav min peros haaretz, aser b'chol peros haaretz. Now this means that even though we have two separate brachos in Birchas Hanenim, one for peros haaretz and one for which is called bar pri adama, and one for peros ha'etz, which we call bar pri ha'etz, but nevertheless, as far as neder is concerned, we incorporate even pri ha'adama in peros ha'aretz. Umuta v'chmein u'pitrios. However, different types of mushrooms, which are not rooted in the ground, they really get their nourishment from the avir, from the air, they're not included under ha'aretz, peros ha'aretz. But v'im omar gidulei karka la'yosu b'kulon. If he says anything that grows on the ground, not that it's rooted in the ground, then he includes in his neder anything that's gadol al hakarka, on top of the karka, which includes even k'moyenu pitrios, different types of mushrooms. Uremini, the Gemara asks a steer from a brisa. I'm sorry. The Gemara asks a steer from a Mishnah onto a brisa. This is a Mishnah in Brachos, Ketzah Mevorchim, on Memam and Beis. Al davar she'en gidulim min ha'aretz, omer shakol niya bidvaro. So that which doesn't grow from the ground, like fish and meat, eggs, milk, cheese, etc., you make a shakal. The Tanya and the Brisa embellishes that Mishnah and says, Al melach, and likewise, salt does not grow from the ground. Al azomis, which is mei melach, al kmeinu pitrios, omer shakol niya bidvaro. So you see from this Brisa that kmein and pitrios are not gidulo min ha'aretz. And you're telling me that if he takes a neder of gidulo karka olai, then it includes kmoyenu pitrios. Omar Abaye answers, and the Gemara is not going to be so happy with Abaye, but Abaye answers mirba ravu me'ara, but menek me'avir yanki v'lo me'ara. That there's a fundamental difference between bracha, meaning birchas hanenim, and lashon neder. In lashon neder, kmein and pitrios are included on the gedulei karka. Why? Because ravu me'ara. They grow from the moisture of the ground. Again, the ikar yanika is not from the ground, but from the avir. And that's why in brachos, it's not considered borei pri hadama, but rather it's shahakol niya bidvaro. Why? Because the bracha of borei pri hadama is limited specifically to that which has its yanika from the ground, not k'moin of pitrios, whose yanika is from the avir. However, with regard to lashon neder, when a person says gidulim min ha'aretz, he means anything that grows as a result of the ground. It's located on the ground. It sucks up some of the moisture of the ground, and that's called gidulei karka. The Gemara is not happy with this. Vaktani, the Mishnah in Masechet Bracha says al davar she'en gidulim min ha'aretz, and the Brisa says that the intention of the Mishnah of davar she'en gidulim min ha'aretz is k'moyenu pitrios, and the bracha is shahakol. It's not gidulim min ha'aretz. And Rava just said, Abaye just established that merba ravu miara, that it grows from the moisture of the karka. So how can you tell me it's ein gidula min aretz? And the Gemara now changes the language of the Mishnah with an amendation. Tnei al davar she'ein yonek min haaretz. Why is it a bracha of shahakol niya bidvaro? Because there's no Yenika min haaretz. So it's not Gidula min haaretz, but rather Yenika min haaretz. And that excludes Kmoyenu Pitrios that will receive a brach of Shahakal because they're not Yonik min haaretz, as Abai said before. The Mishnah says, Anodim in Aksus. Ksus is something that you wear, and it's a malbush. Mutabisak will be Uriah b'chamila. There are all sorts of types of things that you sometimes on rare occasions will wear, like for example, if it's pouring rain, but it's not a normal article of clothing. And those are called sak, urea, and chamila. Sak is something that's woven not from wool, but rather from seir. Urea is a very thick kind of a garment that's not even sewn in small stitches. And chamila is a very thick kind of a beged that covers the head when it rains. All these begadim, because they're so thick, you don't usually wrap your body in it. It's not called a ksus. Ksus is miloshen liskasos, to cover the body. Omar, if the noder took a neder konam tsemer ola olai, mutal is kasos begizet tsemer. So even though his language was semer ola olai, which sounds like any kind of wool, even strips of wool that he puts over his body, no. That's not what his kavanah was. What he meant was not semer stam, just wool, but rather something that you usually wear because it's made of wool. It's a beged arug mitzemer. The same thing applies to pishtan. He took a konoma pishtan ololai. He doesn't mean strips of linen, of flax, that he lays on his body, but rather mutal is kasos by nitzei pishtan. He only refers to a beged shel pishtan, not to strips of pishtan as they're, manufactured. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Lefi Anoder. Wait a minute. Says Rabbi Yehuda, let's understand the context in which he took the neder. What was his situation? What was his reality at the time that he took the neder? And he said, Ola Ola. Did he really mean a malbush? Normally, we say that he meant a malbush. However, Tan, if he was carrying a masa, a burden of tzemer and pishton, vizia, by a rechel kasha, he's sweating and he's got a bad odor, so he wants to take upon himself a neder that he'll stop carrying all this tzemer on his shoulders, which causes him to sweat and toil. Omar konim tzemer pishton ola olai. Now we're going to take him literally and say, oh, he's not referring to begadim. Mutal is kasos. He's allowed to wear begadim that are made of wool or linen, but the asala hafshel achora. But he can't put on his back a masa, a burden of tzemer pishtin. So we interpret his neder in context that since he's being mitztayer, he's suffering from the fact that he's carrying all this tzemer pishtin. He takes upon himself a neder to avoid that tsar. But he's not prohibiting levisha, wearing regular clothing that doesn't cause him any tzar. And that's the Mishnah. The Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Nodim and Aksus muta b'sak ub'chamila. These are those very thick clothing that you don't usually wear. The Asr b'funda. They used to wear a money belt, a chagora chalula. It was a belt that was what's the word? Chol. It was empty space inside, and that's where he put most. But he wore it as a belt. Ubipiskia, okay, that's a very wide kind of belt. Ubiskurtia, we don't know what that means. The Gemara is going to take that up. Ubekatavlia, that is a kind of a malbush that's made of very thick hides. The anpila, this is something that they wore on their legs, on their feet. We had it also in Masechet Yavamis with regard to chalitza. Ubeplinia is a kind of an apron with nasayim and kova. All these are derech malbushim. They are considered ksus. And this is a whole list of what's included in his neder, to the exclusion of very thick clothing that is generally not worn. My is kurti. It's interesting how the Aramaic changed a little bit. We have skurtia, skurtia, and he has iskurti, but it's the same thing. Omar Rabba Bar Barchana kituna ditsala. So what's kituna ditsala? He says here, Chalok shel or shalovshim ma'avdei ha'or al bigdeihem. So those who were in the profession of tanning hides would wear a special kind of an apron that covered their levushim, and that apron was made of hides. And that's considered a malbush. Tanya, now the Gemara is going to bring a brisa that a person who is nodim and aksus, he's allowed to wear a sock and a urea and a hamila, because that's not the derech b'nei lovsham. So what, therefore, is their status on Shabbos? Are you allowed to walk out in Rosh Hashanah? If it's not a malbush, then it might be considered a masa. And the Gemara is going to quote a brisa to establish tzvei dinim. There are two fundamentally different dinim. There's one din of neder, and that, when he says ksus, depends upon derech b'nei odom l'lobsham, at the exclusion of sak and urea. And then there's masa. This is not a masa. He's wearing it. Generally speaking, you don't wear it, but it's not a masa. And therefore, Tanya Yotzim, you're allowed to go out in the Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos b'sak ove b'sogos ove. Okay, something very similar to a sock, and it's made of very thick wool. Ubiyaria b'chamila that we discussed about lahagin b'fnei agshamim. So even though these are not normal begadim that you wear, but nevertheless it's not considered a masa because some people wear them, especially during the rainy season. Aval, but he's not allowed to go out on Shabbos with something which is not at all a malbush, lo b'teva v'lo b'kupa, v'lo b'machatzeles. So some people would put on their heads, some sort of a box to protect themselves from the rain, but that's not at all a malbush, or machatzeles, which he uses as a mattress to sleep on. Now he puts it over his head to protect his body because of the geshamim. This is not called a beged, and therefore it's also to wear that in Rosh Hashanah. It's a masik. Haroim yotzim b'sakim. It was generally common for the shepherds to go out in public wearing a malbush made of sak, because they were always outside and there was rain, so they protected themselves by wearing these sakim. And now the brisa embellishes this by saying, Lo roim bilvadam ro kol adam. Anybody who's wearing a sak in order to protect himself from rains is permitted to go out into the Rishus Harabim. So why does it mention roim? Ella shedibru chachamim behove, because it was very common and regular for the roim to go out wearing these sakim into Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer HaKol Lefi HaNoder. It all depends on what state the noder was in. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Ketzad Omer Rabbi Yehuda HaKol Lefi HaNoder. The Brisa wants to interpret, what does Rabbi Yehuda mean HaKol Lefi HaNoder? He was wearing a beged that was very tight on him, and he was not comfortable. The Omar, he declares Konem Tzemer Olo Lai. then also lilbosh, he's not allowed to wear big day tzemer because he's uncomfortable wearing these woolen garments. But mutal liton, he's allowed to take onto his body a masa shel tzemer. Like, let's say, for example, you have strips of wool, because he's only sweating here or uncomfortable because of the levisha, but not because of the masa, not because he's carrying it. But hoyato and pishtin vizia. But on the other hand, if he was carrying on his back a load of flax, let's call it linen or wool, and he starts schwitzing and he's suffering from the masa of Yomer, and then he declares konam pishnan olelai, then he's allowed to wear mutal lilbosh big day pishtan or big day tzemer. Also liton, but he's not allowed to put on himself a masa of pishtan and tzemer. So everything is determined by what his situation is at the moment that he took the ned. That leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Nun Vav, which Mitzvah Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Thank you so much, and have a great day.